Hello everyone, my name is Sarah. Welcome back to another ATI Science review. This is part 2 of my review, so if you haven't seen part 1, go watch it. Today's part of the review is going to focus on anatomy and physiology. I broke up the A and P review into 2 parts. Whatever I don't cover today is going to be in part 3. So today we're going to be going over the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, urinary system, digestive system, and immune system. I noticed I talked too much in the last video, so I'm going to basically read off of my notes or what I found important on my notes of things you need to know for the test. So without further ado, oh yeah, and I have my notes on my laptop, so if I'm looking down, like that's what I'm doing. All right, so we have, I'll start off with anatomical positions. So we have lateral and medial, which refer to like proximity to the midline. So medial is going to be towards the midline and then lateral is going to be away. So a good example of this is like your sternum, your breastbone is medial to your ribs because your ribs are like, they go further out from the midline. Next we have proximal and distal. So that refers to like the position like towards like the trunk of the body, like the main part of your body. So like my fingers are going to be distal to my elbow. My shoulder is going to be proximal to my elbow. So like proximal distal means that. Next we have superior and inferior. This just means above and below. So a good example of this when we're looking at the cardiovascular system is the superior and inferior vena cava. There's basically just veins that lead back into the heart. So the superior is the one on top and then the inferior is the one on the bottom. Next we have anterior and posterior. So the way that I remember this is a Megan Thee Stallion song, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, like I can't say it because it's like bad language, but she refers to looking at her posterior in the mirror, which is like looking at her butt. So posterior means back and then anterior means front. So, and then we have the anatomical planes. The transverse plane runs parallel to the ground and it's going to separate the body from superior and inferior. The coronal plane or the frontal plane is going to run like this way. It's going to separate the body front and back. The sagittal plane is going to run like this way. It's going to separate the body from anatomical left and anatomical right, which are opposite to what the viewer is. Anatomical left refers to like the subject's left and the subject's right. So like this is my right, so this is like anatomical right, but if I'm looking at it on a piece of paper, it's the opposite. Hopefully that makes sense. So anatomical left and right just refers to like what the patient's or person in question's like left and right actually are. And then the mid-sagittal plane just refers to the sagittal plane that splits the body like symmetrically left and right. And then the oblique plane, like you won't really hear about this much, but it does show up, I guess. Like I got like 1 or 2 questions on my practice tests. So the oblique plane cross sections organs diagonally. So there you go. So moving on into the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is responsible for the movement of blood around the body, as well it transports waste, hormones, ions, fluids, nutrients, and immune materials like lymph. So the arteries, what you need to know about that is that they go away from the heart. They happen to carry oxygenated blood. If you get a question that says, what is the function of arteries? And one of the choices is to bring blood away from the heart, and then one of the choices is to carry oxygenated blood, the right answer is to bring blood away from the heart, because like 99.9% of the time it is carrying oxygenated blood, but like when we're talking about blood, I'll explain later, but sneak peek, spoiler alert, the pulmonary artery carries the oxygenated blood to the lungs, but it still carries blood away from the heart. So that's why, for all intents and purposes, like yes, most of the time it's carrying oxygenated blood, but it carries blood away from the heart. The opposite, so a thing to know about arteries is that their walls are thicker to accommodate for the blood pressure, like of the heart pumping blood through the arteries. So veins go towards the heart. Most of the time they're carrying the deoxygenated blood. This is why if you look at your arm, you can see like the blue versus the green. So the green is like the oxygenated blood, and then the blue is the deoxygenated blood. Also, if you ever get a cut and you see like at first the blood's like a bright red and then it slowly kind of turns like a purplish color, that's like the blood losing oxygen. I don't know, fun fact. That's not going to be on the test, but like I thought it was fun. So like I said, exceptions to the deoxygenated and oxygenated rule are the pulmonary veins and arteries. So the pulmonary artery is going to carry blood away from the heart to the lungs, but it's carrying deoxygenated blood. And then when the lungs oxygenate the blood, it's going to go back to the heart through the pulmonary vein, and the pulmonary vein is going to carry oxygenated blood. So if you ever get a question, they're probably going to ask you this, like about the pulmonary veins and arteries. Just switch the rule in your head of the oxygenated blood. And then capillaries connect arteries and veins together. So we're going to briefly go over the blood flow through the heart. So it comes from the body or the brain through the inferior and superior vena cava. Then it's going to go into the, I have to think about this, right atrium. It's going to pass from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. And then it's going to go through the pulmonic valve, yes, through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs where it's getting oxygenated. It's going to go from the lungs through the pulmonary vein to the left atria or atrium. And then it's going to go down from the atrium to the left ventricle through the bicuspid or mitral valve, and go from the ventricle to the aortic valve, and then out from the valve to the aorta, where it's going back out to the body. So that was a lot. So then the way that I remember the valves, so I just remember retweet, so RT, so right ventricle or right atria tricuspid valve, so RT to the right ventricle. And then I just know that the other one's the mitral or bicuspid valve. I just know that. Systole, I don't know if this is going to come up, but I wrote it down. Systole refers to the contractions of the heart muscle, and then diastole is the relaxation of the heart muscle. So the way that I remember this is my sister has contractions in labor. The doctor told her to relax. So I remember sys, like sister, systole, contractions is contractions of the heart muscle, and then doctor, diastole, relax. So sister has contractions in labor, doctor told her to relax. I don't know if it's going to come up, but if it does, that's how I'd remember that. So then briefly, I'll just go over the epicardium is the outermost layer of the heart. It secretes serous fluid to lubricate it. The myocardium is the middle layer of the heart, and then that's what's like contracting the blood and like pumping the blood. And then the endocardium is the innermost layer, and that lines the chambers and the valves, of which there are 4 chambers, the 2 atria and the 2 ventricles. I wrote it down. So I wrote it down, I know I did. The atrium is, or the atria, plural, is what is like receiving the blood from something, and then the ventricles are the things that are pushing out blood to other places. And then I wrote, I don't know if you're gonna need to know this, but the AV valves, like the atrium to ventricle valves, make a lub sound, and the semilunar valves, or the aortic and pulmonic valves, make a dub sound. So I just remember the heart loves itself, so it loves when blood flows within itself, and then it dubs things that leave it. I just make little things so I have to remember these things. And then the sinoatrial, I don't know how to pronounce it, sinoatrial node sends electrical signals to control heart contractions. You want to know that red blood cells, I can't say the word that it starts with, but I'll spell it, ERYTHROCYTES, contains hemoglobin, which is a protein that binds to oxygen, and this is what carries oxygen through the blood. Plasma is made up of mostly water. It carries clotting proteins, antibodies, nutrients, like macromolecules, except for nucleic acids, waste products and hormones, along with a bunch of other things. And then white blood cells, they're called leukocytes and lymphocytes. They're going to be your defense against pathogens, and that's pretty much like what blood is made out of. But it's made out of mostly plasma. It's like almost like, I think, like 45 or something percent plasma. It could be 50, somewhere between 45 and 55% is plasma. So mostly plasma. And then I wrote something really short about the lymph, which was capillaries drain fluid between cells, which is called interstitial fluid, and filters it through the lymph nodes. I wrote, this is my understanding, is that the lymph nodes kind of like recharge the white blood cells. Either they like make new ones or they recycle, like they put out like new fresh white blood cells, and then the white blood cells, which are called like lymph, drain into the veins so they can be pumped out to the heart and circulated through the body. So when we were talking about the blood flow through the heart, there are actually two systems. The first is the pulmonary system, which carries blood from the heart to the lungs back to the heart, and then the systemic loop or system carries blood from the heart to the body back to the heart. As the blood moves in the systemic loop, it loses oxygen and brings back carbon dioxide. And then as the blood moves through the pulmonary loop, it loses carbon dioxide and gets oxygen. Hopefully that makes sense. So like as the oxygenated blood is like moving around the body, it's going to lose oxygen, and then it's going to pick up carbon dioxide. It's going to bring it back to the heart. It's going to circulate it to the lungs, where the lungs exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. So the lungs are going to give the blood oxygen. It's going to take out carbon dioxide, and then it's going to like repeat. So things to know about diseases of like related to the circulatory system or the cardiovascular system. Hypertension is high blood pressure. You need to know what an aneurysm is. That is weakened blood vessels that cause the blood to bulge. So like normally the blood vessels are like strong and they don't bend, but when they weaken, they bend. So the blood's going to form like a balloon that can pop, and that would not be good. A heart attack is when the heart muscle itself is not getting enough blood, sometimes caused by a blood clot. Atherosclerosis is, wow, I'm having a rough night. Atherosclerosis is basically like lining of like cholesterol plaque along the walls of arteries. Bradycardia is when your heart rate is too slow, and tachycardia is when your heart rate is too fast. The respiratory system is responsible for transporting oxygen and removing carbon dioxide from like cells in the body. The movement of air through the respiratory system goes in through your nasal passage or mouth. It's going to go through the pharynx or the throat. It's going to travel down the trachea. It's going to split at the bronchus. Yes, left and right bronchus. Then the bronchus themselves are going to split into bronchioles, and then the very ends of bronchioles are going to be alveoli, which are the sites of gas exchange. The capillaries from the cardiovascular system in the lungs are going to be very close to the alveoli. It's gonna kind of look like this, and because they're so close, they're actually able to diffuse gases. The gases are going to move from higher to lower concentration. So the capillaries that are very, very high in carbon dioxide are going to give the alveoli carbon dioxide, and then in exchange, the alveoli that is rich in oxygen from inhaling is going to give the capillaries the oxygen, which is going to circulate through the heart. And that's how the blood gets its oxygen. So it's important to know that diffusion increases with a higher surface area. So that's alveoli have a lot of surface area. And then they also increase when there's a shorter distance between the capillaries and alveoli. So it's going to decrease when there's a higher distance because it's more difficult to pass the gases through. And it's going to increase when there's a shorter distance between them. Also, it's going to decrease when there's less surface area on the alveoli or capillaries. It's going to increase when there's a higher surface area. So something important to know is that the left lobe of the lung is smaller because that's where the heart is. The heart's on the left side. So the left lobe has the left lung has 2 lobes and the right lung has 3. The lobes are divided into bronchopulmonary segments, and the segments are encased in the pleura which are, it's like a protective like barrier, and then inside of the pleura, like in between the pleura and the lobes, are like a pleural like fluid. So things you need to know about like general just ventilation, like breathing. Inhalation happens when the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles of like the ribs, they contract. So the volume of the lungs is going to increase, allowing for air to get sucked in. And then the opposite, exhalation, the medulla oblongata and the brainstem is going to control respiration rate by monitoring CO2 levels in the blood and blood pH. The more CO2 levels are in the blood, the higher the respiration rate is going to be to balance out those levels. So conditions of the respiratory system that you need to know. Asthma is when the airways are too narrow, so the person is going to experience wheezing, they're going to experience some coughing, things like that. And then environmental pollutants like pollen, chemicals, and smoke are going to damage cilia and cause inflammation, emphysema, or allergies. Moving on to the urinary system. So this was like the most complicated for me to learn. Like once I got it, I was like, oh. So the main function of the urinary system is to filter blood, maintain salt and water balance, and get rid of nitrogenous wastes. If they ask you, like, what does the urinary system get rid of? And one of the answers is nitrogen, like that's what it is, because it's like nitrogen-based wastes, nitrogenous wastes. So the urinary system is comprised of the kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. Kidneys have two layers. The renal cortex is the outer layer where the blood vessels are, and then they are going to secrete, I can't pronounce this, I'm just going to spell it, erythropoietin, which produces red blood cells. And then the renal medulla is going to be the innermost layer of the kidney. This is where the concentration of urine is regulated. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, and this is going to be where the blood is filtered and urine is manufactured through systems of capillaries like the glomerulus. And then tubules and the nephron absorb the filtrate from the capillaries. So kind of like how the respiratory system, like two systems are interacting with each other. Urinary system is the same way. So the circulatory system's capillaries are going to be like very, very close to the tubules of the nephron, and they're going to be like, there's going to be like absorption happening. So the tubules are going to be pulling out waste. They're going to be pulling out filtrate, I think it's called. Yeah. Glucose, water, and amino acids are going to be reabsorbed into the bloodstream. And then everything else is sent to the collecting duct through the ureter, which is going to end up forming urine. Ureters are the tubes from the kidneys that go into the bladder, and the bladder is going to be the muscular organ that stores the urine. It can hold between 400 ml and 800 ml of fluid, which is like crazy. I told that to my boyfriend. I was like, 800 ml? I feel like the average person is probably around 600 ml, but it's still like really cool to know. Something you need to know is that kidneys also produce the active form of vitamin D. They maintain blood pressure by balancing the volume of blood through vasoconstriction or vasodilation. That is going to control the volume of the blood. Renin is the hormone secreted by the kidneys that regulates blood pressure by removing water and salt. That's super important. The urethra carries urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. It's shorter in females than it is in males. Urine is composed of 90% water. It also has urea, salts, or organic waste molecules. And then this came up in a few of my study books, but not all of them, so I wrote it down anyway. Antidiuretic hormone, ADH, concentrates the urine. This causes more water to be reabsorbed. Diabetes insipidus happens when ADH is absent or like the body doesn't secrete enough of it. So this is going to cause the water to not be reabsorbed, which is going to cause very frequent urination and consequently like excessive thirst, because the person's like not going to be able to really like absorb water through their kidneys. So there you have it. So that's all I wrote about the urinary system. The digestive system is responsible for breaking down food for distribution and absorption of nutrients, and it's controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you think nervous system, the parasympathetic is rest and digest, sympathetic is fight or flight. So movement through the gastrointestinal system, it's going to start at the mouth, it's going to go down the esophagus, into the stomach, which I think is like here. It's going to move from the stomach to the small intestine, and the small intestine is divided into the duodenum, that's the first part, the ileum, second part, and cecum, it's like that's the part where the large intestine is. And then it's going to go into the large intestine, which is also called the colon, down through the rectum and out through your butt, which is also called an anus. Sorry, I'm trying to be mature, but like I'm just not sometimes. So mechanical digestion starts in the mouth, which is chewing, and then chemical digestion also occurs in the mouth. The saliva is going to chemically break down the food. Salivary amylase is going to break down carbs, and then salivary lipase is going to break down fats. So then we have, after the food like moves through the mouth, at that point it's called the bolus. It's going to move down into the stomach. The stomach is also going to do both physical and chemical digestion. So the mechanical or physical digestion is going to happen when like the stomach muscles are like churning the now called chyme in your stomach, right? Yeah, the stomach muscle contractions break down the chyme, and then the chemical digestion in the stomach is done through pepsin, which digests proteins in the stomach acid, which is hydrochloric acid. And then the mucus is just going to help the stomach lining to like not be eaten by the acid. So basically the stomach creates the environment by having like hydrochloric acid in it. The pepsin is going to really double down and digest the proteins in it. And then the mucus is going to protect the stomach lining itself from being digested, basically. And then after that, it's going to be dumped into the small intestine. The alkaline bile juices from the gallbladder, or basic juices from the gallbladder, and then bicarbonate from the pancreas are going to neutralize the chyme in the small intestine. And then basically lots of chemical digestion happens in the small intestine. So we have brush border enzymes break down chyme, carbs break down into monomers. I wrote that sucrase breaks down sucrose into glucose, and lactase breaks down lactose into glucose. So that happens. Sorry, I have a lot of error today. Microvilli and villi are like little, like I don't know. It looks like this. And basically, like the chyme is like moving into every little nook and cranny of the small intestines, and then that is where the ileum is. It's going to absorb nutrients, and I wrote down specifically vitamin B12. The pancreas also puts its enzymes into the small intestine. So we have pancreatic amylase, which is going to break down those starches. Trypsin breaks down protein, and then lipase breaks down lipids. So the way I remember it was trypsin sounds like tryptophan, and tryptophan I'm pretty sure is like a amino acid, I think. And it has to do with proteins. I know in my head it's like a protein amino acid, and so trypsin sounds like tryptophan, and so it breaks down proteins. And then lipase is like lip, and that's going to break down lipids. That's what I remember that. And I just remember amylase as carbs. So after it goes from the small intestine, it's going to move into the large intestine, and then that is basically just absorbing water and absorbing salt. And then because it's absorbing water, this is now going to form fecal matter, also known as stool, also known as poop. And then bacterial fermentation happens in the large intestine, and then we pretty much all know what happens after it moves from your colon to your rectum. It gets eliminated. So things that I wrote about the gastrointestinal system was that ghrelin is the hunger hormone. I make it, in my head it sounds like gremlin, and gremlin's like, ah, and you're like hungry, and you're like hangry. So I remember ghrelin is the hunger hormone, and then leptin is the fullness feeling hormone. And then insulin is the hormone that reduces cellular uptake of glucose, and this is basically going to lower your blood sugar. And then glucagon is the hormone that stimulates the breakdown of stored glycogen, which is going to raise blood sugar. Bile is a chemical that's released by the liver into the small intestine to break down lipids, And then peristalsis, not to be confused with the muscle contractions of the stomach that break down the food, but just general muscle contractions. This is what's going to move the food or digested material in the right direction down your intestinal tract and down your gastro system. So if you've ever swallowed something upside down and you're wondering why isn't the food getting stuck, it's because of peristalsis, because it's just moving. So if you ever put your head upside down and swallow, that's why the food moves this way and not with gravity. So, oh my gosh, that was so quick. That was literally so quick. Am I missing something? I'm already at the immune system. I'm shocked. That was so good. Okay. Sorry if I talk too fast, guys, by the way. It's so late at night. I have work tomorrow and I need to wrap up my studying and start really getting the proper amounts of sleep. So I'm trying to get this over with as quickly as I can. But anyways, the last section of part 2 of my review is the immune system. This is going to protect your body from pathogens. Pathogens are diseases. So we have I broke everything down into the innate immune system and adaptive immune system. Okay, so the innate immune system is some stuff that you're born with. So think skin, think mucous membranes, think white blood cells, macrophages, you're born with those. It's the first of your immune system to act. So it is comprised of skin, mucous membranes, macrophages, acid in your stomach, the inflammatory response, aka histamines, your body's ability to create a fever, phagocytes, which are neutrophils, and then natural killer cells. So skin and mucous membranes act as a physical barrier, and that's your first line of defense. If that is breached, there's going to be an inflammatory response, which are histamines, and then this is going to increase blood flow to that area, and then thus increase white blood cells to that area. Yeah, pretty much. I wrote mast cells and basophils release histamine, also heparin, which keeps the blood from clotting. I don't know why that happens, but I wrote it down, so hopefully they don't ask me that on the test. Macrophages engulf proteins in a process called phagocytosis. They literally just eat them whole, and I find it so funny. Macrophages also wear the parts of the pathogens that they ate on them, and then that is called antigen presenting cell. They're called APCs. Fever is an increased temperature that speeds up the rate of an immune response. And then natural killer cells are cells that bind to infected pathogens. No, wrong. Natural killer cells bind to cells that are infected with pathogens, and then they pretty much release something called granzymes and tell the cell to kill itself, which is apoptosis, programmed cell death. So basically, it's like a mercy killing, basically, where the natural killer cells will encounter infected cells and they will give them the tools that they need to apoptosis. So next we have the adaptive immune system, and within the adaptive immune system there are two systems, the cellular and humoral systems. The cellular system destroys infected cells. So we have antigens, are the molecular signature on a pathogen. I wrote aka the ID tag, so the body can identify disease. Macrophages present antigens because they're wearing them to helper T cells. Helper T cells send signals to white blood cells that an antigen is present, and then they secrete cytokines to activate killer T cells. And helper T cells also activate B cells. So helper T cells just sound the alarm, so something is wrong. So then killer T cells, also called cytotoxic T cells, kill infected or abnormal cells, assuming the same way that natural killer cells do, except this is specific because memory T cells, T cells also differentiate and they form memory T cells, and this is going to remember antigens for future infections. And then the humoral system destroys pathogens. So the B cells are going to be activated by helper T cells. B cells mark pathogens for destruction, super fun. And then B cells differentiate into plasma cells that secrete antibodies. Antibodies are like, I believe, proteins that block antigen receptors to keep them from invading into cells, or they clump antigens together, making phagocytosis easier. So basically, like, think of like a little like cell. The antibodies will like surround the cell so it can't like infect anything, and then the antibodies can also like clump cells together, so it's easier to eat them. Yeah, I wrote that the lymphatic system and red bone marrow make white blood cells. B cells grow and mature in the bone marrow as well. T cells grow in the thymus. Innate immunity is considered to be non-specific and fast-acting, and adaptive immunity is considered to be specific and slower to react. Also, it's important to note that active immunity is when the body makes its own antibodies. So think like, I believe vaccines are a form of this, where, you know, a person is exposed to a weakened or dead virus, and so the body makes its own antibodies. And then passive immunity is when I wrote antibodies. The body gets antibodies like the easy way from another source. So think like, this happens with infants and mothers when the mother breastfeeds. She's also giving the baby like antibodies. So this is a form of like passive immunity. So also super important to know, like I got almost every practice test I've had a question on this. AIDS is caused by HIV, which infects helper T cells, and then this prevents T cells or helper T cells from activating B and killer T cells. So that's like super important. Autoimmune disease is considered to be an overactive immune system. This happens when the body mistakes its own cells as antigens. Examples of this are type 1 diabetes, which is when the body attacks cells in the pancreas that secrete insulin. Multiple sclerosis is when the body attacks the myelin sheath, which surrounds the axons of nerve cells. And then rheumatoid arthritis is caused by joint damage. I'm assuming like the body like thinking the joints are bad, so it like kills it. So that is it of part 2 of my review. If you're watching this like before October 15th, 2021, I'm thinking my last part to the science review will be like around October 15th. I may not get to a third review because I'm basically just gonna like condense all my notes, and I think I'm just gonna leave it at that because tomorrow I was really supposed to stop studying today, but I might have to study a little bit tomorrow because I'm trying to not do anything like 3 days before my exam. It's taking it easy. So I really hope that was helpful. Also, Hazel requested a math review, so I'll be doing that within the next few weeks. I'm thinking I'll figure it out. Within the next like week or two, my math review should be up too. So if you found this video helpful, please like it or comment it. Any suggestions on things that I could go over, write it in the comments. If you'd like any clarification on anything, if I presented anything inaccurately, I would also like love to know. So like please let me know in the comments if I said anything wrong. So if you want to see my face again, subscribe. Also, we can be friends. Find me on Instagram at DelightfullySarah, and I'll see you real soon.